Sadness and outrage tonight after another school shooting in America.
Good afternoon, this is News 2, and we're following a breaking story today, a shooting at a high school in Littleton, Colorado.
There's word potentially multiple children have been killed. This happened at the Robb Elementary School in the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District.
2012 Colorado movie theater massacre.
7 bodies were discovered in Oklahoma.
Mosques in Christchurch were targeted, the country's worst mass shooting ever.
Biddick Drive, located in the Keyham area of Plymouth, England, erupted into chaos at about 6 p.m. on August 12, 2021. 22-year-old Jake Davison burst out of the home he shared with his mother after shooting her dead just moments before. Davison then began a killing spree, which would end the lives of 5 more people, including himself. But before we get too far, let's rewind a little bit. The area of Keyham in Plymouth was a usually warm and inviting community. Many residents described it as a quiet but friendly place to live. Around 6:05 p.m., Davison's mother, 51-year-old Maxine Davison, made a frantic call to her sister, explaining that she was in a heated argument with her son that was escalating into physical violence, and begged her sister for help. Her sister quickly dialed 999 and told the operator that her sister's son had her by the throat and was keeping her from leaving the bedroom. Her sister also explained to the operator that her nephew had mental health issues and her sister needed help right away. Within 3 minutes of the 999 call, Davison retrieved his legally owned pump-action shotgun and opened fire on his mother. He shot her twice, quickly ending her life. Maxine Davison was a warm and naturally funny lady. She enjoyed making people laugh. Josh and Zoe, her other children, describe her as having a hippie mindset, being a very free-spirited soul. She reportedly had a rough childhood, as her mother died when she was very young. Nevertheless, Maxine grew up and became a great mother to her 3 kids. She struggled with Jake in the years leading up to the shooting, though, but she handled it the best she could. After killing his own mother, Davison left his house, immediately stumbling upon a father and daughter walking their family dog, Mabel. 43-year-old Lee Martin and his 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, were out enjoying a nice stroll that evening. Sophie was pushing her teddy bear in a buggy as they walked down Biddick Drive. Lee and his wife Rebecca started their relationship in 2006 and later married in 2009. Lee is widely described as a man with a great spirit. He was happy and treated everyone around him with kindness. Lee loved football. He began playing at an early age and continued playing throughout his life. He was a yacht worker and was said to be extremely close with his 2 kids, 7-year-old Caden and Sophie, who was 3. They had adopted Sophie just 2 years prior. Lee described her as a beautiful little girl who was cheeky and full of life. Sophie was also said to be a fearless little girl. Her mother boasted that Sophie was always in charge and knew what she wanted. Sophie was also sweet and playful, often dressing up as a princess. The two had little to no time to react when Davison targeted them. Lee attempted to shield his daughter from the shots, but the shotgun proved to cause tremendous damage. Witnesses recall that Lee was shot 3 times, while Sophie was shot once, from only 3 feet away. After shooting both Lee and Sophie, Davison began shooting into his neighbor's home through the front door window, injuring both Michelle Parker, 53, and her son Ben Parsonage, 33. Parsonage said, quote, "He had a smirk on his face, like he didn't care what he was doing." Another neighbor named Sharon reported hearing the loud bangs, first thinking they were fireworks. Her son went upstairs and was saying, quote, "Davison is shooting in the air." But the bangs they heard were actually the shots he fired at Lee and Sophie, and the shots he fired into the other neighbor's home. They looked outside and saw Davison walking down the street holding his gun. After Davison was out of view, Sharon ran out of the house and saw Michelle Parker, who had been shot through her front door. Sharon also saw Lee and Sophie, describing the scene, quote, "They looked like they were cradling each other. The little girl was facing the man. She looked really peaceful. The dad still had his arm around his little girl." According to witnesses, Michelle Parker, who was still injured from being shot, ran to cover Lee and Sophie with a blanket to cover their bodies. Davison then made his way down the street and into a nearby park, opening fire on a 59-year-old man named Stephen Washington, who was also walking his dogs. Stephen was born in 1961 and was 2 weeks old when he was put into foster care. He was adopted by his foster family and never had contact with his biological parents. In 1983, Stephen married his wife, Sheila. They had 4 children together over the next few years. At the time of the shooting, Stephen was a full-time caregiver for Sheila, who was disabled. They owned 2 dogs, a husky mix named Poppy and another husky named Drift. He reportedly left the house that day without his phone, keys, or wallet. He was only supposed to be gone for a short time to take the dogs on a walk. Sheila recalls that the last thing her husband said to her was, quote, "See you in a bit, won't be long," as he walked out of the house. The Devon and Cornwall police received a phone call about the ongoing shooting at 6:11 p.m., and they quickly responded, rushing to the scene. Davison moved on to Henderson Place, where just 2 minutes later, he shot Kate Shepard, who was 66 years old at the time. Kate was walking on her way home after a shopping trip that day. Kate was born in February of 1955 to her parents who were both artists. She herself was an artist and was colorful in her painting, her textile designs, and her clothing choices. Many describe her as being incredibly creative and compassionate, also having a great sense of humor. Kate and her husband John had just celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, and just a few weeks before, they became grandparents for the first time. Kate was described as a wonderful sister, mother, wife, aunt, grandmother, and friend. Davison then continued on his way, entering a parking garage, where he was seen by 3 people, making verbal threats to 2 of them. Davison did not fire at any of them, though, instead, turning around and back tracking towards Henderson Place, where he had just shot Kate. When he returned, Davison observed the multiple emergency service vehicles and personnel frantically tending to his victim's wounds. An unarmed officer, Police Constable Zach Printer, spotted Davison and ran towards him, ordering him to stand still. Before the officer was able to reach him, Davison turned his shotgun on himself and pulled the trigger. He died less than 20 minutes after initiating his rampage. The police arrived at the scene within 6 minutes of the call and found all 5 victims. Kate was rushed to the hospital as she was found still alive. The other 4 victims were unfortunately already deceased by the time first responders got to the scene. A lot of resources were dispatched to this call, including ambulances, specialized paramedics, air ambulances, and even hazardous area response teams. Sadly, the damage was too much, and though the first responders did all they could, there was nothing that they could do to save the ones who were shot. Kate Shepard, the last of Davison's victims, was rushed to Derriford Hospital, but ultimately ended up losing her life along with the 4 other victims. Davison was caught on multiple cameras during this incident, walking around the streets holding his gun. Let's talk more about Jake Davison for a moment. Davison was 22 at the time of the shootings, born on August 21st, 1998. He was originally from Plymouth and lived there in a modest house which was shared with his mother. He worked as an apprentice crane operator at a defense and security company called Babcock International. Growing up, Davison had some complex mental struggles. As a child, he was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and he attended Mount Tamar School for Special Needs Children. According to TheGuardian.com, Davison had a history of violence at this school. He apparently punched a fellow student multiple times. He was also known to have put a teacher in a headlock and headbutted another. These are obviously not great behaviors to see in a child, and should have raised some alarms. In year 9 of his secondary education, he was reviewed by Careers Southwest, which is a mental health guidance counseling organization. This review had an overwhelming theme, that Davison loved guns and was looking into joining a gun club. A significant section of the review talked about his interest in guns. He was suggested to join the Army Cadets. Karen Roberts from Careers Southwest recalled that Davison's mother placed a call to them in November of 2016, expressing her worry about her son. She claimed he was isolated from others and was obsessed with weapons, spending hours online each day chatting with others about firearms. Roberts met with Davison in December of 2016, and after speaking with him about his future plans, he told her that his true passion was firearms and that he wanted to work in a gun shop. Roberts was growing more concerned with his unusual interest when it came to guns, so she brought her worries up to her manager, suggesting they submit a prevent referral. I had never heard of a prevent referral before, so I definitely had to do some research on it. As far as I've gathered, A prevent referral is a process where someone can express their concerns about an individual who may be vulnerable to radicalization. The concern is passed on to officers that specialize in this field, and they are able to determine whether or not someone needs additional support or intervention. This process is one of the 4 elements of contest, which is the United Kingdom's counter-terrorism strategy. Unfortunately, the prevent referral was never submitted, as there was no evidence found that Davison was talking to people who could take advantage of him. Therefore, they did not believe he would be radicalized. Throughout Davison's life, especially during his teen years, multiple people had growing concerns about his mental health, especially his family. In 2016, Davison was reported to the police after he attacked a man and his pregnant girlfriend. This incident happened not too far away from where his later killing spree would occur. Ultimately, Davison was only issued a warning for this violent episode and was not prosecuted. Davison finally applied for a shotgun certificate in July of 2017. His reasoning for wanting a gun was apparently for clay pigeon shooting. He disclosed his autism and Asperger's syndrome on the form, and also gave police permission to contact his general practitioner, though his doctor did not provide any information to the police when they spoke with him. He said he declined to provide a report because it sought an opinion on matters falling outside his medical expertise. In 2018, his certificate request was granted. This would allow Davison to purchase a gun freely. It was later that year when he bought his black Weatherby pump-action shotgun. In September of 2020, Davison got into a fight with teenagers at a local skate park after one of them called him fat. Davison proceeded to punch a 16-year-old boy 9 times, possibly knocking him out. He also slapped a 15-year-old girl before leaving the park. Davison went home, retrieved his shotgun and loaded it, threatening to go back to the park. Thankfully, his mother talked him down. Knowing his future endeavors, it's safe to assume he might have killed the 2 teenagers that day. He was later arrested because of this attack, but apparently the police failed to realize that Davison had a firearm certificate and owned a shotgun. It was known after a short delay, though, and both his certificate along with his shotgun were confiscated. During this time, the criminal justice system was facing tremendous backlogs because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Rather than charging Davison for this offense, which would have led to court appearances, putting more work into the backlog, they opted to enroll him in a restorative justice program. According to restorativejustice.org, the program aims to bring those harmed by crime or conflict and those responsible for the harm into communication, hopefully enabling everyone affected by the incident to play a part in repairing the harm and finding a positive way forward. In this case, many feel that this restorative justice program was insufficient and that Davison should have faced harsher penalties. If Davison was properly charged in this case, his shotgun would have probably been permanently seized. But no, of course that didn't happen. Instead, his certificate and shotgun were returned back to him in early July of 2021, 5 weeks before his murderous spree would take place. According to TheGuardian.com, they were returned to him without the decision being reviewed by a senior officer, as it should have been. The Devon and Cornwall police later admitted that the gun should never have been given back to Davison. Davison also had a heavy social media presence. He uploaded videos to YouTube, often speaking about being socially isolated and unable to meet women. He also made several references to incels, otherwise known as involuntary celibate men. Incels are widely known for being misogynistic, often blaming women for their sexual failings. This internet subculture is credited with encouraging other men to blame their misfortune on women, along with men who are able to have relationships with them. Some incels believe that they are actually genetically disadvantaged to these men that they call Chads. On the afternoon of the shootings, Davison reportedly viewed an online thread asking why incels felt the need to end their own lives.
Oh mate, I should have gotten with I should have, because I'm not trying to brag or big up myself, but like I did have girls into me. Some of them couldn't have made it more obvious. Like I remember one time, the day she left college, she literally came in front of me and was like, I'm leaving today. Literally, like that's.
Backing up to April of 2021, he posted a video in which he spoke about the assault he carried out on the 2 teenagers at the park, stating that they hurt his ego when they called him fat. This video was posted only 4 months prior to his shooting. It was around this time that he started to refer to a man named Elliot Rogers. Rogers was a US mass killer who killed 6 people. He is often idolized by the incel community. 1 month before the shooting, in July 2021, Davison posted another video. In this one, he talked about his lack of success at dating apps and his self-hatred that he had been experiencing. He described himself as the black sheep of the family and expressed his dissatisfaction of living with his mother. He went on to talk about his physical appearance, describing himself as fat and ugly. In July, Davison also was looking up a mass shooting which occurred in 1978 in Berkshire, in which 16 people were killed. 3 days before he went on his killing spree, it was reported that he was searching for information on US serial killer Ted Bundy, as well as incel murderers. Davison also frequented the popular website called Reddit. One of his posts made weeks before the attack read, quote, "Mass shootings are new phenomena that cannot be directly blamed on guns. Plus, there are a lot more guns in Europe and the UK than people think." He also posted in a subreddit for virgins, complaining about being a virgin, and going on to say that he could not attract women at all. Complaining that he had missed out on a teenage romance, again referring to Chads, whining about how some men were easily able to get women. Davison posted, quote, "I have a feeling like I missed a boat, and it's never coming back." Davison would also post to Reddit, sharing his hostility and resentment towards his mother. According to some sources, Davison's Reddit account was suspended the day before he carried out the shooting. Apparently, he had been talking to a 16-year-old girl from America, being friendly at first. According to the girl's report, Davison began to continuously ask for her to date him, also inquiring about her coming to visit him so they could have sex. He allegedly said it was okay for them to have sex since the legal age of consent in the UK was 16. Reportedly, his mother had recently learned about his misogynistic views in the months leading up to the shooting. A neighbor said that Maxine and her son were once close, but once she learned about his sexist views, they began to argue more. Overall, his online presence was obviously filled with sketchy behavior. From frequenting incel threads to searching information on other mass shootings, Davison clearly had some scary stuff going on in his mind. Being interested in serial killers and shooters is obviously not a sign of a killer in the making by itself, but paired with everything else going on in Davison's life, I think it adds to the warning signs that multiple people were already seeing. Anyway, back to the horrific events of August 12th, 2021. That day, Lee and Sophie planned to walk their dog Mabel, while Lee's wife Rebecca and their son Caden would be attending a gymnastics class. After the class, around 6:30 p.m., the two headed home. Rebecca recalls that she attempted to get a hold of her husband on the way home, but the 2 messages sat undelivered, never opened by Lee. A little later, a friend of Rebecca texted her to ask if she had heard of the shooting involving a little girl that took place on Biddick Drive. The two arrived home to an empty house, and Rebecca said that she headed towards Biddick Drive to see what was going on. The police told her to go back home, so she did. The police arrived at her home that day and informed her that her husband and young daughter had been killed. Rebecca went on to say that when she found out her husband was seen cradling their daughter, she was not surprised. According to everyone, Lee was an amazing father and did everything he could to protect his family. Lee and Sophie were buried together in the same coffin. Stephen Washington's wife, Sheila, said that after her husband left on the walk, she heard some loud bangs, but thought nothing of it. She then heard a loud noise at her door and was surprised to find that their dog, Poppy, arrived home by herself. Stephen and their other dog Drift were nowhere in sight. It was only 10 minutes after he had left for his walk. Poppy was reportedly scratching on the door and shaking, running into the house as soon as Sheila opened the door. Sheila claims that she started to hear sirens at this time. This gave her a terrible feeling, and her biggest fear came to life when she got the knock on her door later that night. The police broke the tragic news to Sheila and her family that Stephen had also been killed that day. Drift was not found at the scene, but Sheila was reunited with him the following day. Kate Shepard's husband of 40 years, John, grew anxious when she failed to arrive home after her shopping trip. He went searching for her and happened upon the scene. First responders were tending to her when he showed up. He could only see her feet, but he found out a little later that it was indeed his wife. He went to the hospital with his wife and waited to hear any news. The doctors came to explain what was going on, and when they told him that Kate had passed away, he said that he went completely numb. Both neighbors that were shot and injured in their house, Michelle Parker and Ben Parsonage, made a full recovery. It was during the inquest held on this case on August 19, 2021, where a big discussion of the major faults that occurred prior to the shooting took place. They found serious failings by the Devon and Cornwall police, especially when it came to them returning his gun. They also came to the conclusion that Davison should never have been granted a license to hold a firearm in the first place. These are described as catastrophic failures according to the inquest jury. Ian Arrow, who was the senior coroner for Plymouth, said, quote, "There was a serious failure by the Devon and Cornwall Police Firearms and Explosive Licensing Unit in granting and later failing to revoke the perpetrator's shotgun license." Arrow also called for the UK to reform their gun laws further. The chief constable of the Devon and Cornwall Police said that there was no known motive for these attacks. They said that they believed it to be the result of a domestic incident that carried out onto the streets. They didn't consider terrorism to be the motive, but many have questioned if Davison's strange ideologies could be constituted as terrorism. The community of Keyham and Plymouth was absolutely shocked to hear of this devastating shooting. A candlelight vigil was held for the victims the day after the attack, on August 13th. Hundreds of people from the surrounding areas were in attendance. Flowers and tributes were placed by the people who gathered at the vigil to commemorate the victims and to show support to their families. Multiple memorials were placed in the areas nearby to the many crime scenes, where people are able to bring flowers or any other gift to show their condolences. Unfortunately, this is yet another case where all of the early warning signs of a mass killer were ignored. Even with strict gun laws, somehow Davison was able to slip through the cracks. This shooting is reported to be one of the worst in UK history, and I think we can safely say that it's thanks to their laws surrounding firearms. In comparison, mass shootings are a frequent occurrence in the United States, often leading to many more people being killed or injured in the process. Either way, this shooting is no less tragic than any other shooting. 4 families lost their loved ones, people who they cared for dearly, and whose light will forever be absent from the world. Each victim today deserved to live the rest of their life peacefully, and sadly, they will never get the chance to. Mental illness is a major global problem and needs to be addressed accordingly. So many people failed these 4 families. So many missed red flags that, if caught, could have prevented this tragedy. Remember to keep the victims and their family in your minds. They deserved so much more than they got. Please let me know your thoughts and feelings on this case. It truly is a hard one to comprehend. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll be back with another as soon as I can. Peace.